Did you know that over 150,000 Russians fought in the German army against the Soviet Union itself? Spread across 113 battalions and several divisions, these men fought under the German flag with one clear objective: to defeat Stalin. But this uncomfortable chapter has been silenced for decades. Both during the Soviet era and in present-day Russia, talking about it has been virtually taboo, because it challenges the official narrative of a united Russian people resisting the German invader. And the most surprising part? Not even Hitler trusted them. He feared them, feared that they might rise up from within. And in truth, he wasn't wrong. The unthinkable eventually happened in France, not far from the Swiss border, just months after the Normandy landings. The unit responsible for the mutiny belonged to the 30th Waffen SS Grenadier Division. But before we reach that key moment, when loyalty broke and betrayal became inevitable, we need to go back to the beginning. To understand this forgotten story, we first need to discover why thousands of Russians chose to fight under the enemy's banner. On June 22, 1941, the German army invaded the Soviet Union, sweeping deep into its territory. By late August, German troops had reached the outskirts of Kyiv, and a month later, they captured the city in a massive encirclement operation, taking over 650,000 Soviet soldiers prisoner. In just a few months, nearly all of Ukraine had fallen under German control, and the Soviets no longer exercised any real authority there. In many cities, including Kyiv itself, the Germans were welcomed enthusiastically by segments of the population and even hailed as liberators. However, hopes for independence were quickly dashed. The Germans had no intention of granting Ukraine any sovereignty. Instead, they sought to colonize it. Life under German occupation turned out to be little better than under Stalin's regime. Still, many Ukrainians chose to collaborate with the Germans. The German acceptance of Ukrainian participation in their military unfolded in phases. In 1941, no locals were accepted. Hitler believed Germany could win the war on its own. By 1942, support came mainly from European allies like Italy, Romania, and Hungary, who sent troops to the Eastern Front. By 1943, things had worsened dramatically for the Germans. They began recruiting more men from Soviet-occupied territories. While these troops weren't trusted for frontline combat, they were assigned to rear-guard duties. In early 1944, many of these battalions were transferred to the Western Front to help defend the Atlantic Wall. The idea was to reduce the risk of defection that might occur if they remained on the Eastern Front. However, once the Allies landed in Normandy, many of these units surrendered without a fight. It was in this context of desperation, when the Germans had almost entirely been pushed out of Soviet territory, that two well-known Ukrainian volunteer units were formed within the Waffen SS. In Ukraine, the SS found no shortage of volunteers. Until the German invasion in 1941, Ukraine had been part of the Soviet Union. But brutal Stalinist policies had fostered deep anti-communist sentiment, and many Ukrainians longed for national independence. As a result, many Ukrainians, particularly nationalists and anti-communists, were recruited into the SS. Thousands of Ukrainian POWs joined the SS and were assigned as guards in Soviet prisoner camps, gaining a fearsome reputation for brutality. They became known as the Tronicky SS, named after the camp where they were trained. Other Ukrainians were organized into a full combat division, the 14th Waffen SS Volunteer Division, Galicia. The division was formed in the summer of 1943, just as the Germans were about to be expelled from Ukraine. Most recruits came from eastern Galicia, a region between Poland and Ukraine that once belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Over time, and as casualties mounted, more Ukrainians from other regions joined, those retreating alongside the Germans in the face of the Soviet advance. The 14th SS Division fought alongside other multinational SS units, which included soldiers from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Latvia, Estonia, Croatia, and Belarus, among others. Elements of the Galicia Division took part in anti-partisan operations behind the lines on the Eastern Front and later engaged in direct combat against the Red Army during what became known as the Battle of Brody. After suffering heavy losses and being nearly destroyed in battle, the division was reorganized and redeployed to Yugoslavia in October, where it saw its final combat, fighting both partisan forces and the Red Army. Despite the fears of the German High Command that members of this division might rejoin the Red Army or the partisans, the truth is that the Ukrainians remained committed to their fight against Stalin. Of the at least 40,000 men who served in the division throughout the war, there were only around 600 deserters. However, they didn't switch sides to join the enemy. Instead, they joined the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, which also fought alongside the Germans against the Red Army. On the other hand, we have the 30th SS Grenadier Division, the unit where a dramatic mutiny against the Germans took place. This division was formed near Warsaw in August 1944, at a time when the Red Army was just a few kilometers from the city. It was made up of Russians, Belarusians, and some Ukrainians who had volunteered to fight the Soviets, united by their shared hatred of communism. The division had around 11,600 men, commanded by a small group of German officers and NCOs. Ironically, its divisional symbol was the double cross. Contrary to what its soldiers believed, they were not deployed to fight the Red Army, but instead were sent to southeastern France to suppress the French resistance. They established their headquarters in Wesel and were assigned to secure the Belfort Gap, a strategic area that could serve as an Allied corridor into Germany, where the resistance was particularly active. 2 months after the Allied landings in Normandy, the situation in France was about to change drastically. The German front in Normandy had collapsed, and on August 15th, the Allies launched a second invasion in southern France. One of the regions where the French partisans were causing major disruption was Franche-Comté, and that's precisely where the 30th SS Division was deployed. It's worth noting that these Eastern volunteer units were intentionally deployed to the Western Front so they couldn't easily defect to the Soviets. But this logic was flawed. If captured by the Soviets, these men would be treated as traitors or spies. Ironically, the Western Front actually offered a better chance to defect. A similar mutiny had already occurred the year before, in 1943, when Bosnian Muslim SS troops rebelled against their German officers, an incident that caused major embarrassment for Himmler. Now, in August 1944, another mutiny was about to unfold, this time involving Ukrainian troops increasingly frustrated with their German commanders. The Ukrainian officers of the 30th SS Grenadier Division, led by Major Lev Holoba, were dissatisfied with the situation and tired of the arrogant, distrustful attitude of the German command. So they initiated secret contacts with the French resistance. Holoba, commanding a battalion of 818 men, struck a deal. In exchange for shelter, food, and medical care, they would eliminate the German leaders of the division and join the fight against the Germans, bringing their weapons and equipment with them. On August 27, 1944, the battalion set out on maneuvers alongside their German officers. Holoba didn't know for certain if his troops would follow him once the revolt began, since, for security reasons, the plan hadn't been shared with the rank and file. The signal to start the uprising would be a green flare. A Ukrainian officer on horseback turned toward a German lieutenant, also on horseback, and shot him. Other involved Ukrainian soldiers opened fire on the Germans, urging the rest of their comrades to do the same. Within minutes, the SS column descended into bloody chaos. Dozens of Germans were killed, including all 25 German officers in the battalion. Only 3 Ukrainians died in the process. The battalion then joined the French resistance, contributing heavy weapons such as 45 mm anti-tank guns, 50 mm and 82 mm mortars, 21 heavy machine guns, and hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition. The defectors were integrated into the resistance as the 1st and 2nd Ukrainian battalions of the French Forces of the Interior, and later into the French Foreign Legion, where they continued to fight the Germans until the end of the war. As for the Ukrainian units that did not rebel, they were punished by the Germans, and many of their members were reassigned to forced labor battalions. The 30th SS Division was partially reorganized and later fought in the Colmar Pocket near the Franco-German border. In December 1944, the 4,400 remaining men were withdrawn and sent back to Germany for training and reorganization. What remained of the Ukrainian component was transformed into the 1st SS Grenadier Brigade of White Ruthenia, although it only had one functioning regiment before it was disbanded in April 1945. Lastly, it's worth noting that most German infantry divisions stationed in France had their own Eastern Battalion composed of Soviet volunteers. However, these forces proved to be unreliable in combat, as clearly demonstrated during the Battle of Normandy.